There are moments in life when something once so familiar, so intimately woven into the fabric of our days, begins to change, not with violence or drama, but like a quiet tide that slowly recedes, almost unnoticeably at first, until we realize, one day, that the shoreline has shifted, the contours of our world altered, and the life we thought we understood no longer responds to the same touch, the same language, the same efforts to restore what once was. And in these moments, these fragile, painful, disorienting moments, most of us instinctively try to force things back into their previous forms, as if we could hold back the tide of time and change with our bare hands, as if the sheer force of our will could resurrect an old rhythm that now exists only as an echo in memory. Not because we are foolish or blind, but because we are human beings, clinging to the safety of what is known, fearful of the void that follows the unknown. Alan Watts, the British philosopher who spent his life bridging Eastern wisdom with Western minds, once said, "The more we struggle for life as pleasure, the more we are actually killing what we love." And in this single, devastatingly true sentence, he revealed the paradox that haunts our lives, that the more tightly we grip the things we love, the more quickly they wither beneath the pressure of our fear, our need for permanence, our desperation to control something that was never meant to be fixed in time. Watts, in his gentle, poetic manner, reminded us not only of impermanence, but of the art of flowing with life's changes, as though they were not interruptions, but invitations, calls to deepen our understanding, to release the illusion that we are in command of the unfolding universe, and to discover, through surrender, a beauty so subtle that it cannot be forced into words or captured in the rigidity of definitions. It is in this context that the Japanese aesthetic of Yūgen offers its quiet companionship, a word that, like a shadow behind the light, points toward a kind of beauty that is elusive, hidden, and ungraspable, a sense of profound grace that emerges only when one ceases to chase it, when one allows the mystery of life to remain partially veiled, knowing that the most beautiful things in existence are not those that are clearly seen, but those that are sensed in the depth of stillness. Yūgen is the chill in the air on an autumn night, the sound of wind whispering through an empty bamboo grove, the way the moonlight touches the surface of a still pond at midnight. Moments that cannot be manufactured, only witnessed, not forced into being, only discovered by accident, or rather by stillness, by allowing. And here lies the convergence of Watts and Yūgen, in the shared reverence for the ineffable, in the deep recognition that the rhythm of life is not something to be conquered or restored by effort, but something to be participated in, like a dance whose beauty is not in leading, but in listening. Listening so deeply that one becomes the music itself. When life shifts, as it inevitably does, when relationships fall apart, when careers end, when identities unravel, when old beliefs no longer comfort us, the instinct is to resist, to go to war against reality, to reassemble the pieces of a puzzle that no longer forms the same picture. But what if the art is not in rebuilding the past, but in allowing the form to die so the formless can breathe through us? Watts once remarked with characteristic wit and serenity, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." And perhaps this is the very heart of our suffering, our obsession with defining, with stabilizing, with naming and owning and securing everything that moves through our experience, forgetting that the beauty of life is inseparable from its wildness, from its refusal to stay still for our comfort. To live deeply, then, may require a kind of trust so radical it feels like madness, a trust that does not demand explanation, that does not rush to replace the old structure with a new one, but that simply waits, watches, breathes, and allows the unknown to arrive in its own time, like dawn arriving on a mountaintop where no one is watching. This too is the essence of Yūgen, a reverence for the shadows between things, for the subtle impressions left by something unseen, for the emptiness that is not absence, but fullness waiting to be known in a different way, a different language, a different dimension of perception, one that cannot be taught, only experienced. In silence, in our modern world where everything is driven by clarity, productivity and proof, Yūgen is a rebellion of softness, a quiet protest against the need to explain, a refusal to reduce the infinite to a slogan. And Alan Watts, in his lifelong celebration of paradox and mystery, understood that the deeper truth of human life is not found in mastery over the world, but in attunement to it. In the way a surfer rides the wave, not by conquering it, but by surrendering to its power. So when life begins to change, when you feel that strange, sorrowful pull that something is ending or shifting beneath the surface, perhaps the most powerful act is not to fight it, not to demand answers, but to sit beside the river and watch it flow, to let go of the need to return to how things were, and to instead listen, without agenda, to what the silence is trying to say. We were never meant to remain unchanged. To live is to shed skin, to lose and rediscover ourselves over and over again, and to mistake these inevitable deaths as failures is to rob them of their gift, the gift of transformation, of emergence, of stepping into the next unfolding chapter. Not as a master, but as a humble witness to the mystery of it all. Watts would often describe the universe as a wiggly thing, not neat, not linear, not bound by straight lines or rigid formulas. And we, being of the universe, are also wiggly, mysterious, always becoming. To try to force ourselves or our lives back into a shape that has already passed is like trying to step into the same river twice. It is not only futile, it is a refusal to receive what the present moment is offering. The wisdom, then, is in stopping, in not forcing, in allowing life to be as it is, not as we wish it to be, not as it once was, but as it is now, right here, in this breath. And in this stopping, we begin to see the outlines of Yūgen emerge, not in grand events, but in the quiet noticing of shadows, the rustling of leaves, the soft ache of a heart that has stopped resisting and started listening. You do not need to have the answers. You do not need to fix what is breaking. You do not need to rush toward a new version of yourself. All you need to do is pause, trust. Let the form dissolve. Let the emptiness breathe. Let the stillness guide you not with clarity, but with a beauty that cannot be described, only known, like the moon behind clouds or the echo of a distant bell on a foggy morning. Alan Watts invited us to laugh at our seriousness, to dance with our confusion, to embrace our uncertainty, not as problems to be solved, but as sacred aspects of what it means to be alive. And Yūgen shows us that it is precisely in the not knowing that the greatest beauty hides, not in the answers, but in the space between the questions. So when your life shifts, when the old story no longer fits, when the people around you no longer recognize who you are becoming, when the road ahead disappears into fog, do not panic, and above all, do not force it back. Instead, soften your eyes. Listen to the silence beneath the noise. Let the shapes fall apart. Let the mystery return. Because sometimes the most profound beauty arises only after you've stopped trying to control it, only after you've made peace with not knowing, and only after you've surrendered to the gentle, wild, unknowable rhythm of Yūgen, the art of seeing the invisible, the forgotten language of the soul, the poetry of the shifting world. And perhaps what we are truly afraid of when life begins to change, when the things we clung to begin to dissolve, when identities we spent years constructing start to feel like costumes we can no longer wear, when the rhythm of our days no longer dances to the familiar music, is not the loss of what once was, but the vastness of what might now be. The infinite possibilities that emerge the moment we release our grasp on certainty. And this vastness, while rich with potential, can also feel unbearably empty at first, like stepping into a night forest with no map, only the quiet pulse of intuition guiding our next step. It is in these thresholds, these in-between moments where the past has died but the future has not yet spoken, that the philosophy of Alan Watts becomes most necessary, not as a prescription, not as a rigid doctrine, but as a kind of gentle hand on the shoulder, a voice that whispers not instructions but invitations, reminding us that the attempt to control life is precisely what causes us to miss its deepest beauty, because to try to fix reality into a stable shape is like trying to freeze a flame, like trying to pin down the wind, like trying to possess a sunset that was only ever meant to be watched, felt, and then released. And in these quiet, hollow spaces where the ego screams for ground and the soul yearns for surrender, the spirit of Yūgen arrives not with answers, but with atmosphere, with the subtle awareness that there is something unspeakably beautiful hiding behind the veil of change. Something sacred within the dissolution itself, something that cannot be understood with the mind but only received with the whole body. Like the way a falling leaf teaches you more about time than a clock ever could, or the way a single moment of silence in the middle of grief carries more depth than all the condolences in the world. To resist change is to fight the very fabric of life, because life, in its most essential nature, is movement, an unceasing dance of becoming, a river that never flows in reverse, a story that can only be lived forward, even when we are still haunted by the pages we wish we could rewrite. And Alan Watts, with his Zen-like playfulness and cosmic perspective, constantly reminded us that we are not separate from the flow of this story, but integral to it, not as its author, but as its expression, as the wave is to the ocean, unique for a moment, and yet never separate from the whole. And if we could truly understand that, if we could feel, not just intellectually grasp, but feel in the very marrow of our being that we are not standing against life, but made of life, that we are not external observers of a universe we must manage, but living threads woven into its infinite tapestry, then perhaps we would stop forcing what no longer fits. Perhaps we would stop clinging to versions of ourselves that have already died. Perhaps we would realize that letting go is not the end, but the beginning of something quieter, truer, deeper than anything we could have planned. This is why the concept of Yūgen is not merely artistic or aesthetic, but existentially vital, because it gives us a language for what we feel but cannot name, for those moments when our hearts sense a presence beyond the visible, for those experiences that tremble on the edge of awareness. Like the way a piece of music can bring us to tears, not because of its clarity, but because of its mystery, its unexplainable emotional gravity, its ability to point towards something beyond the rational, towards something that only the soul can comprehend. Yūgen teaches us to be comfortable with the unfinished, the incomplete, the unresolved, to find meaning not in the destination, but in the journeying itself. To accept that not every pain needs a solution and not every question needs an answer. That sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to sit quietly in the presence of our own becoming, without judgment, without urgency, allowing the fog to clear in its own time, knowing that clarity born of stillness is infinitely more trustworthy than answers born of fear. Alan Watts often said that the meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. Yet everyone rushes around in a great panic, as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. And this insight, delivered with a kind of amused compassion, cuts through the illusions we build around our purpose, revealing that perhaps life is not a mountain to be conquered or a puzzle to be solved, but a moment-to-moment unfolding to be witnessed, loved, participated in, like a dance where the joy is in the movement, not in reaching the end. And in this dance, There will be moments when the rhythm changes, when the steps no longer make sense, when the partner leaves the floor and the music pauses. And in those moments, the temptation to force it back, to resume the dance as it once was, will be strong. But perhaps that is the moment to sit still and listen more deeply, not to the music of the past, but to the silence that precedes a new song, because only in stillness can we hear the next note. Only in surrender can we receive the new rhythm that life, in its quiet generosity, is always composing for us. 2. Practice the art of Yūgen is to cultivate reverence for what we do not and cannot fully understand, to walk through life not as masters but as pilgrims, not as engineers of destiny but as lovers of mystery, to greet each shift not as a threat, but as an opening, not as a detour, but as a doorway into a new intimacy with being itself. And in doing so, we begin to experience the kind of beauty that is not loud or grand or spectacular, but subtle, aching, and eternal. The beauty of shadows on snow, of tears that fall without shame, of endings that reveal hidden beginnings. And when you live this way, when you let go of the compulsion to fix everything, when you stop trying to return to the old version of your life, when you allow the present to be what it is without resistance, you begin to notice a different kind of clarity emerging. One that is born not of knowing but of being, not of control but of communion. And in that communion, you are no longer afraid of change because you understand that you were never meant to remain the same. You were meant to be transformed, to be broken and reformed, to be opened by loss and softened by surrender, to be shaped not by force but by grace, not by certainty but by wonder. And in that shaping, in that quiet, mysterious, deeply human unfolding, you begin to touch something eternal, something that no shift in your external life can ever take from you, because it lives not in what you have, but in what you are when you stop grasping and start listening. So when life shifts, and it will, again and again, don't force it back. Let it change you. Let it soften you. Let it teach you to see in the dark. Let it lead you deeper into the quiet art of Yūgen, because in the end, what remains is not what we held on to, but what we allowed to pass through us. The winds of change, the seasons of the soul, the dissolving of all that was never ours to keep. And if we can meet that dissolution not with fear, but with reverence, then perhaps we will finally understand what Alan Watts tried so beautifully to remind us of all along, that life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived, and that it is only in surrendering to that mystery that we begin at last to truly live.